Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast. I am your host, Shana Terrell, educator activist dedicated to the freedom and liberation of her people. Welcome back, everybody. Of course, I want to shout out Happy Women's History Month. Thank you to everybody who joined us last week as we talked with the Miss Joyce Abbott on our show. What a wonderful guest to help us open up for Women's History Month. And as always, shout out to the Center for Black Educator Development and Bright Beam for their partnership for creating this platform for us to talk to real people in the real struggle, doing the real work. Because as we know, this is the place where we come to talk to educators, real educators doing real things. So this week, our focus will be on building the Black educator pipeline and teacher effectiveness. And our guest today is a real sister friend of mine in education. Akosua Lesesne is an educational design leader. She specializes in developing and leading implementation for education leader and instructional coaching, curriculum programs, and pedagogy that employ an African American education for liberation approach to inspire Black learners. Her work leverages the transformative elements of Black teaching traditions. A teacher development framework for Black pedagogical genius she developed. Akosua is the founder of Sisters in Education Circle and Lesesne Learning LLC. Prior to founding Sister in Education Circles, Lesesne Learning, Akosua had 15 years of experience teaching district level leadership and consulting in various large, predominantly Black and Latinx school districts along the East Coast. She earned her bachelor's degree cum laude from Harvard University, a master's of arts in teaching from Tufts University, and a doctorate in educational and organizational leadership at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. So if y'all could please welcome my girl to the show. Hey, hey.
Hey, Shana!
How are you?
I'm doing well, even better now that I get to see you and have a conversation with you this afternoon. It's been a while, this whole pandemic, right?
It definitely has. I was about to say, I don't think I've seen you in person since this pandemic hit.
I
I don't think
know,
we've
I
been able
know.
to hug and love up on each other.
Yes.
And I know you've been a friend of the show and watching from afar, so I was super happy to be able to get you on the show.
Yay. I'm happy. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so proud of you, Shana. I
Thank
see you.
you.
Yes, I am watching. I'm like, that's my girl.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes.
Listen, it's folks like you who I like following y'all footsteps and am like holding on to y'all legacies and the work and the paths that y'all paved to be able to be in this great space with y'all. So I appreciate everything that you're doing. Thank
Wonderful.
you for
Wonderful.
visiting us today. So generally we start out by asking our guests to talk about your journey in education. Why did you decide to become an educator?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. And I think I answer the question a little differently every time it's asked of me because there are a couple major things that led me into education. But I think primarily what it was, I was a very young mother. I had my daughter when I was in middle school, which meant that by the time I was in high school, I was going to PTA meetings. And by the time I was in college, I was an involved parent and for an elementary school and middle school student. Right. And so it was
Mhm.
me and my daughter, and I was making my way through college. It took me 10 years to earn that bachelor's degree. And so, while parenting and working full time. But the beauty of that is that it allowed me, as an involved parent, as a very young but still involved parent, it allowed me to see what was happening in schools at that time. And so that's when I first noticed, like, with my daughter's teachers, we were up in the Northeast in the Boston, Cambridge area. And even in these very so-called progressive spaces, right, there were very few Black educators. Tokenism, when it came to like actually engaging Black students in their African heritage in the curriculum. And it terrified me. I was, I was like, this is not okay. And it was likely going, I'm sure it was going on when I was a student, but typically, unless you become a parent or go back into education, it would have been years before I actually reflected on it. But because I was brought back, because it was actually my child, I was like, this is not good.
Mhm.
This is not good. And so what I started doing was started giving like workshops to my daughter's camps and schools and stuff, like, because like she would go to summer camp and the black girl's hair would be matted at the end of the summer because the white camp directors didn't know how to care for black hair, care for black skin. So I would start doing little workshops like that, right? Going into her teachers' classrooms but the more, and then from that, I started a consulting business. So this was way before this current DEI movement, right? I started like going in and consulting with mostly the organizations that she was involved with, but and then my clientele grew. And the last client, I was like, it's the violence, right? The violence, the ignorance, the arrogance, the anti-blackness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought to myself, if I'm really going to impact change, I need to be part of a school community. Because it was a nice cushy life, right? I would come in, they would pay me however many dollars an hour to do this workshop, and everybody would profess that they got it and learn all their little DEI buzzwords. But the way that the dynamics were happening at this particular school, I was like, we are not safe. And so that's actually what led. So like I said, it took me 10 years to actually earn my bachelor's degree, because I had to, start and stop and parent and things like that. So I actually had enough coursework left at that point that I could pivot. And I started studying, Black children's learning styles. At that time, like, we were focusing on Black boys a lot. So I started studying that. And then I immediately was able to go into a Master's of Art in Teaching program once I graduated. And it was really, we need to be in these buildings. We need to be in these buildings. Yes. So sorry for that long story, but that's how I got into education.
Not long at all, because it has been a journey.
Yeah.
But what I love hearing, the connection in your story, is that being a mother is what led you to being a teacher.
Yes.
And I was also thinking about the dynamic between how you're in school yourself, experiencing what you're experiencing as a student, and then at the same token, right, at a different level, you're then, from the parent side of it, experiencing what your child has to experience dealing with education. So it was like a double-edged sword. You like, this ain't good for me, and my baby not about to go through the same system, so this has to change.
Yes.
But I love that too, but making yourself available to be able to have at bats and experiences that your daughter had, to say, like, you know what, I'm going to help people learn, I'm going to help people grow, but understanding like, hey, it's not sustainable in terms of like, people take what they take out of a workshop and then move on.
Right.
But true sustainability, like getting into the fabric of the community, is being in that community.
Yes.
Is what I'm hearing you say. And I think that was super, super dope for you to have that mindset. But it's funny, right, hearing you talk. Your experience, because you like, them little girls' hairs was matted at the end of the summer.
Right.
Because they didn't have folks who understood them and understood their culture in practice. So that leads me to thinking about, what impact do Black teachers have on education, and why do we need Black teachers? Like, that's
oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, the impact that Black teachers have on the education of Black children, and also just education in general, right? So, people who have heard me speak before, or, even in casual conversation, I claim without equivocation, Black people are and have been pedagogical geniuses. We are pedagogical geniuses, right? And so, in that word pedagogy doesn't just belong to like Dewey, right? It doesn't just belong to Maslow, right? It doesn't just belong to the white men, right? And some white women theorists who schools of education focus on. We invented pedagogy. I'm convinced of that. Like, that African knowledge, African ways of being and doing that we brought over with us. And then using that African knowledge of teaching, of learning, of enlightenment, of education as touching the soul and touching the spirit, that we then manifested in these really horrible conditions, right? And even out of these horrible conditions, our pedagogical genius showed through. Right. And so there's not really what area does a Black teacher not touch? right?
Right. But
So
you're right.
from relationship to being able to see yourself, to the the ethic of care, right? That warm demander that we talk about,
Mm-hmm.
to the content, the actual content, right? Because people want to act like that genius doesn't extend itself to content, right? Like
Yep.
physics and science and English, and like we have produced the best people on this earth. We,
Facts.
we
Gotta
really
go.
have. And so, so I would say that there's not an area that having a Black teacher doesn't touch, from your self-esteem to your engagement to your imagination about who you are and what you can be, right? To
Mhm.
advocating for you. I mean, we all know what the research says. You know what the research says. Your guests know what the research says. But even down to the idea that if you have a Black teacher, you actually aspire to go to college, right? So there's something in the way that I interact with you on a daily basis. There's something in the way that I teach. There's something in the way that I deliver that content that impacts your very imagination about who you are and who you can be. And that comes wholly from our African genius. We brought that over here with us. And
Yes.
we brought that over here with us.
It's our
So,
sense of knowing and our way of being, and some of
mhm,
it is naturally in us. So when you're
yes,
talking about like best thing on this earth, because we are who we are.
we are who we are.
What has taught us this. I mean, we bring who we are within our souls. And the other
Yes.
piece of what you're talking about too is just that sense of communal being,
Mhm,
as who we are as African people.
mhm.
Which is why we seek to touch the lives of other folks. And you said
Right.
it dead on when you said something about seeing a Black teacher inspires young people to go to college. Yes, because I can be that, or this connection of like, I want to be that.
Right.
And it's attainable
Right.
for me, I think drives home. And I love that you didn't glaze over the fact that we always talk about relationships and we always talk about inspiration. And we also talk about being culturally aware, right? Like
Right.
those are things that Black people can bring, but not glazing over the fact that content knowledge, and content expertise
Right.
is definitely the strength of what Black people bring into the space of education. I think that that gets grazed over because it's so white dominated now.
Right.
It's
Right.
such a need for cultural responsiveness and
Right. Right. Right.
relationships.
Right.
We need more Black people for that. No, we need more Black people for academics too. We
We
need
need
more
more
Black
Black. Right.
people for their
Right.
content expertise.
Because if you don't love me, if you don't know my culture, how could you possibly relay the content in a way
Yep.
that's like you're simply not. You're not like, and people are giving themselves credit for doing that and saying, oh well, they're not.
They're
They're
not.
not.
And
They're not.
children don't learn from people that they don't like. We
Right.
all know that. And it's
Right.
hard for children to learn from people who can't connect and don't have an
Mm-hmm.
understanding of who they are at their being. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why we also harp on this in this show. Like, it's great to just say we need Black teachers when we do, but we need
Right.
more qualified and we need more effective Black teachers as well to be able to
Right.
function in this space. We don't want people in front of kids just because they Black.
Right. Well, we
That's
need black teachers who are both our skin folk and our kinfolk.
Can you talk about
We
it? I want
we
you to talk about
we
that.
need black teachers who are both our color and our kind.
Yes.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so, because the fact of the matter is, just like we brought that pedagogical genius over with us, and it has manifested itself even in these conditions, right?
Mhm.
There are those of us who have been hoodwinked, right? Led
Yep.
astray, bamboozled. And there are black teachers, black people in general, who have come to believe that white folks' water is wetter and their ice is colder.
Yes.
And
And grass
so
is green.
they can't even buy into this notion that it's the black pedagogical genius that is helping not just black students but the entire field, right? So we all know that study that says that all students report higher ranking their black teachers more highly, right?
Yep.
And I know my focus is black students, your focus is black students, but we don't need to gloss over the fact that it's not just for black students. Black teachers are pedagogical genius, and pedagogical genius touches the lives of all children.
Also, yes.
And but there are those of us who don't believe that.
Mhm.
There are those of us who've internalized this notion of anti-blackness. There are
Yep.
those of us who believe that white folks are the thinkers, right? And we are the mules and we are the doers. And we don't need those people in front of our children. We need people who are tapped into their pedagogical genius, who honor and respect that legacy, who are aspiring every day towards our standards, not Eurocentric standards that don't even work for European American children. It's
Yep.
not working.
Nope.
And so yeah, so that would be very dangerous to put that person because they have black skin in front of our children, because they don't even know who they are, and so they can't ever fully tap into the pedagogical genius which is black. I mean, and so I always say black pedagogical genius, but that's almost redundant. Pedagogical genius is black.
It's black.
It's black.
That's what it is.
Yes.
Yes. Well, part of that pedagogical genius, you connect that always to Black teaching traditions. Can
Yes.
you talk to us about like what is the Black teaching tradition and why is that so important in our community, especially
Absolutely.
now?
Yes, especially now. Absolutely. So we, again, black folks we've been doing this, right? Right. We've been for thousands of years, right? Cultivating the spirit, right? Touching the spirit, cultivating people's minds, cultivating their understanding of who they are and their greatness in this world, right? And so as a teacher, I told you early on that with my daughter, I began to notice the lack of black teachers, the lack of black curriculum, even in these alleged progressive spaces, just the level of anti-blackness and things of that nature. But I also noticed when I went into teaching, I also noticed that there was this innate way that I related to black children.
Mm.
There was this, and when I even in my teacher preparation program, right, there were things that we were being taught, but there were these instincts that I had.
Yep.
And these instincts, like I keep telling people, like pedagogy is not just the purview of white men and white women, right? It's not some word that we should be afraid of. Like my mama is a pedagogical genius. Like because of the way that she raised, like the things that she taught me and
Yep.
how she taught them to me, the ways in which she cared for both me and my daughter, right? That's pedagogical genius, right? So you don't need a degree, you don't a black, our grandmamas and our mama them, right? And so I noticed that when I went into the classroom, there was a particular orientation that I had towards the profession
Mm-hmm.
and a particular orientation that I had towards black children. That was
Mm-hmm.
just innate. I didn't learn it in my teacher preparation program. In fact, there were times when I brought it up in the teacher preparation program, they wanted to shoot it down because it wasn't in the textbook. And I'm like, no, 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 no. What you're not going to do is tell me how to raise black children. What you're not going to do is tell me how to inspire the genius of black children, because I've been doing that.
Yep.
I've been doing that with my black cousins and my black neighbors. We've been doing that with each other, right?
It's what happens in our communities.
It's what happens in our community. And so I also noticed that my white colleagues didn't have that. They had a different orientation. And so,
Very different.
so
Very
even though I eventually wrote about it and began to codify it, I just want to tell you, like Beyonce say, I got this from my mama. Yeah, I got this stuff from Tina, right? Right.
Yes.
And my mama and my grandmama them and the women at the church who were sending people to college and whispering things in their ear that would carry them through, or that would inspire them to move through. That is pedagogy.
Yes.
That is pedagogy. Right. And so I continued to kind of notice these things. And so by the time I got to my doctoral work, I was like, well, let me see if and of course I read a lot of the research, that black women in particular, and also our brothers also have been writing about the brilliance of black teachers. Vanessa Siddle Walker has been writing about it, Lisa Delpick, and so also being introduced to that as I began teaching, that helped me give voice to what I was acting on the inside. And so when I got to my doctoral work, I said, the theoretical frameworks are amazing, right? So like, how, Michelle, the one that Michelle Foster put out, Jacqueline Jordan Irvine, Teresa Perry. So we're talking about 1989 and the 90s and the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And because I intentionally chose to get an EDD versus a PhD, right, where I could still focus on practice and extract theory from my practice. So they said my EDD experience is a whole other conversation, but that was what they told me I would be able to do, and that's what I tried to hold them to. And so I said, well, what if I can describe what happens pedagogically in the classroom based on these traditions of Black teaching excellence? And that's where within a part of my dissertation, I did a lit review on, all those scholars that I just mentioned and more. And from a pedagogical standpoint, so from a teacher preparation and development standpoint, I said, how can we pinpoint what's happening, what are these things? And so I did that, and from my literature review came up with 9 elements, which I have termed the Black teaching tradition, BTT. So the Black teaching tradition is just one, I'm just throwing my ring into the hat, my hat into the ring. It's just one way that many of us have described this amazing tradition of Black teaching excellence. I call it the Black teaching tradition. There are 9 elements. So I talk about, well, what are the main characteristics, right? What are the roles that these teachers take on and how that shapes their pedagogy? And what are the embodiments? Meaning, what are those things that shape our everyday actions and decisions as teachers? And so that is the Black teaching tradition. Again, 9 elements, 3 categories, and that's what I do my consulting around. Like, so when I'm consulting with people, I leverage those components of, like, how do we develop teachers in those legacies of Black teaching excellence?
And the reason why I love that is because so much as Black people, right? We love oral history tradition. That's like who we are. We pass down our information through stories, and again, also through action, through ways of being. But writing it down gives us the opportunity to actually preserve our tradition.
That's
Shout
the
out
word.
to Dr.
That's the
Carr
word.
and Dahudi, right? We are writing. Writing it down gives us the opportunity to really preserve traditions. Because when we look at ourselves, like, as Black people, you wonder why do we have Sunday dinner, right? Like, it's tradition. Like, that's just something that you was brought up in.
Yes.
Why do I have to, like, grease my daughter's hair,
Right.
once or twice a week? Because that's
Right.
a tradition, right? Like,
Right.
that's how I was
Right.
brought up. That's what her mother did.
Exactly. And why do I do it in this way,
In
right?
this
When you
way.
sit between my knees, I'm parting the hair,
Exactly.
Yes, yes.
It's your tradition. It's our
Yes.
way of being. It's how we're taught. It is how we pass down actions, which then roll into to traditions. But
Yeah.
why would anybody see that separate from education and teaching? Because we all know that Black people have taught their children taught our children since the beginning of time. We have taught
Right.
our own, this is another going to a whole nother conversation of why public education for Black people is in a state it's in now, because we've allowed others to
Right.
infiltrate the
We've
system.
taught our own, we've taught them well,
Mm-hmm.
and we've taught everybody else's children in the United States too.
that's a fact.
We've raised other people as well.
Taught and raised.
Yes, we've raised other people's children, right? And that's why it gets so insulting. It's just like, well, y'all, you guys have lots of anti-Black insults, but what you're not gonna do is tell us that we don't know how to teach and raise children.
Definitely not gonna tell me I don't know how to raise no kids when I
You're
raise
not. You're not gonna do that.
father's kids. Okay,
Right.
so like,
Right. We raised your children.
raise your children, but Black people aren't good parents.
Yes, right, exactly. But if I can, very quickly, because I know some people might be interested, just list the different elements, right, of the Black teaching tradition. So I said characteristics is the first category. So this is like, what are those 2 things that really are the core values or that characterize Black teaching? And those 2 things I saw from the literature are high expectations and professional expertise.
Mm-hmm.
So really seeing, teaching, really going for that expertise and not just let me get this quick certification and do the minimum, right? So high expectations and professional expertise. As far as their roles within the Black teaching tradition, Black teachers teaching with this tradition take on the role of advocate, a bridge between where you are and where you can be, and community member / extended family. And then the embodiments, meaning what are those things that really shape every action and every decision, every instructional decision I make? It's answering, meaning I'm answering a higher call. So when I'm teaching, it's not just a job. I'm answering a higher call to liberation of my people.
Yes.
Yep. That believing that I have this unshakable belief in us as a people and as you as my student. Caring, so there's that love that we talked about, and then overcoming, that my destiny is intertwined with yours, and I know that every day in this classroom we are both overcoming. And so everything that I do instructionally, all my pedagogy is really shaped by that notion, that idea that we're always overcoming. We are together because I am in this with you.
Yes.
So I just wanted to share those quick elements.
I think Thank you for sharing that. And again, listening to some of them very inspiring, but things that are grazed over, right? In education, especially
Right.
that very last one, as like folks seeing their destiny intertwined with their students,
Yes.
right? That's the future of our nation right there.
Right.
So what we pour into them and how we treat them is going to be a clear indication on
Yeah.
how we live and what happens to our country in the future.
Right. And
Um,
then also going, I'm sorry, also going back to content. I teach physics differently if I understand that every moment I'm overcoming and we're overcoming together.
yep.
Right. I teach AP US history differently. If my every single action is governed by this understanding that we are actively real time overcoming together and our destinies are intertwined together. So again, it's not just this fluffy nice thing that's not rigorous and not robust. This is genius, sis. It's genius, and I call it that without equivocation.
Listen, it is pure genius. But that the notion that you're teaching differently and understanding differently, I think a lot of times, even when we talk about like what's culturally relevant and culturally
Hmm.
competent, it's spun a lot of times and focused a lot of times on race.
Right.
But even what you saying, like I teach physics differently when I know that my fate is intertwined to your fate, and we're dealing with what's happening right now. That perspective in itself is culturally relevant. What's
Right.
in front of our youth right now that has to do
Right.
with science, that has to do with physics, and
Right.
how are we working on that together and bringing in current events and bringing in current things so they have a deeper understanding of the world and their place in it. But
Yeah.
again, beyond the classroom,
Yeah.
how do we?
And how can we use what we're taught, and what I'm teaching you to overcome?
Yes,
To all right today, right now, to overcome mass incarceration, to overcome underemployment, to overcome gentrification, right? To overcome
all of that. And I
all of
think
it.
it's so many times that people are like, oh, I don't know how to connect this material to what the children are experiences or children are asking. But what this got to do with me right now? If you're not pushing yourself to really, again, overcome
Right.
and see how your material can connect to overcoming, you got to
Right.
push a little harder. You
Right.
definitely have to push a little harder.
Right.
Um,
And because my destiny is tied up with your destiny, I'm urgent about it. I have high expectations. I need you to get this because you're getting this means that we can both move forward.
yep.
Right? It's not I'm not separate. My life and my destiny is not separate from yours. So there's a sense of urgency and high expectations. I know you can get this because I need you to.
But it also comes with people recognizing and seeing privileged, uh, but not also like owning it as like I'm privileged. Like just because
Right.
you got a degree and got a job, you have not arrived because the country
Girl.
is still burning down around us. People are still dying,
Girl,
right?
what
Like,
was it Malcolm who said, well, what's a black man with a doctorate?
what is he, right?
Right.
What is
He's still, yes.
still a black man. You're still a
Right.
black man in America.
Right.
Things are still happening in the world around us, but you hit it right on the head. That urgency when you feel a different connection, but it comes overall with feeling a different connection to the profession. So when you're talking about like in the classroom or that connection to the work in the classroom and beyond the classroom, but when you're getting in the profession, how do you see this? Is it just a job to you? Are you going into the profession saying like, oh, I just want to help children? You are helping children, but seeing it again connected into you, like I am doing this because of the community effect of all of this. It is my job to train my replacements, right? It is my job to go ahead and build the next generation of future leaders. Like it's all tapped into this. And I think that that is a missing element overall in education. I think we have a lot of warriors in education who believe that. I think we
Absolutely.
have a lot of liberation warriors um, fighting in education.
Absolutely. We do. Yes.
But I think there's a large population of education who sees this as a job or as a service to other people, and not as a liberation movement or a movement beyond the classroom.
Right.
Um, and as we know, right, like that takes a large, again, humanistic element out of that. When you think
Hmm.
like, oh, I'm just doing this to help somebody else. But I think a big piece of what has seeped into this to cause this, right? Colonization of education.
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
education has most
Absolutely.
certainly been colonized.
Hmm.
Um, and you talk a lot about this too. So I would love for our audience to hear from you in the ways that you've seen education being colonized right now, and then like some solutions on how we can work to decolonize it together.
Absolutely. So, once these buzzwords enter the field, right, they kind of lose their sting. Right.
Mhm.
And so now, even with this whole idea of colonization or decolonization, it's become this cute, very sterile thing, right?
Mm.
Colonization is violent.
Yep.
Decolonization is a major risk and a lot of work.
Mhm.
Right. And so, colonization began a long, long time ago. And what we are seeing is simply just an extension. It's simply just move, it's simply just continuing in that vein of how do I maintain. So some people, so this generation of teachers and educational leaders or so-called educational leaders, they may not have initiated the colonization, but what they're doing is they're working hard to maintain the status
Retain
quo.
it and sustain it.
They're,
Yes.
they're working because why? Because they have a salary, because they have benefits, because that salary and those benefits can allow them to send their children to private schools,
Schools that they don't
right?
teach them.
While you are working in public schools and getting public school dollars to lead, and you're not leading. You're literally not doing your job for the people you're getting paid for. And so and you believe that means that you believe that when this thing falls down, it's not going to eventually fall on you, which is short-sighted and selfish and just not good analysis.
Nope.
It's not,
And
and
not
so
connected to what we
it's
just
not
talked about, intertwined destinies.
intertwined, right? And so, so I think what I would say about colonization is that, it's violent. It's been a long project. And primarily what's happening today is the colonization of education is not necessarily initiating colonization, but but the fact that you are maintaining the status quo, which allows it to move forward, which means that you're not going into these places and you're not shaking it up. You're not asking the questions about which children are being served and which children have the power in this particular district. You're not asking the questions about who got that job and why, and the nepotism that's going on, and how that nepotism entrenches the status quo.
Mhm.
Because one thing that I've experienced also is that as a quote unquote radical Black educator, both Black, white, Latinx folks, Asian folks will get together to get rid of the radical Black educator because now you're messing up my bag.
Yes, you
Now
talking
you
too much. You too loud. You doing too much.
Right, because I don't have any intention of shaking it up. I don't have any intention of coming in here and addressing the ways in which the ways in which we are maintaining colonization within education, the ways in which we're maintaining the inequity, the ways in which we're starving Black schools, the ways in which
Mm.
we are making sure that Black children don't have a plan afterwards, right? So you have entire schools or entire regions or entire areas in a school district where the college going rate is abysmal. And you would never allow that for your child,
Would
right?
not.
You would never allow, but you have the power and the position, right? Like you
Exactly.
are the post-secondary coordinator, for example, in the district, and you still go home and sleep at night,
Mm.
and
Listen.
you're okay with that, right? And so I think that's what I would say about colonization is that, right, what's happening now is not necessarily the initiation of it, but maintaining the status quo, which is just as violent. It's just as violent.
And folks need to recognize the correlation you're making to colonization and violence, because I think that is very easy. When we use the word violence, people tend to look for something physical.
Right.
Even in today's age, we are somewhat recognizing emotional violence, but
Yeah.
still through words, right? Name calling and manipulation to some degree. But when you talk about education and what is happening to children, especially poor Black children in this country, folks will never see that as an assault
It's an assault.
on them and their families. They
Yeah.
would never see the blow, because the results of what happened to that, right? People can't see that as violent, right?
Right.
But it is when it's mass incarceration of people in these communities. It ends up and results in lower reading rates for people in this community, a lower financial stability and
Yep.
quality of life.
Yep.
It's straight violence.
It's violent. It's murderous.
Is
It's homicidal.
It's most certainly homicidal. And
It's
for people
homicidal.
not to connect even the violence epidemic that's happening in our communities now directly to what's happening in education, to me, is
Mm-hmm.
problematic, right? I'm going
Yes.
into these conversations, and I'm just like, okay, so nobody sees the connection. Like, these young people were once in somebody's school. These young people are part of somebody's community, and schools are beyond just, oh, read this book. We are teaching young people the ways of being,
Yes.
and being citizens in society, but intentionally, right? Like, schools are creating these microcosms where Black children aren't going to be able to learn. Like, that's intentional.
It's intentional.
And folks, I feel like sometimes don't connect the dots in that,
Yeah.
and the folks who are in it don't connect the dots in that.
Yeah.
And I love that you pointed out, you're very honest about, like, decolonization. It's not easy. It is
And it's
not.
not safe.
It's not safe. It's not an easy road. It's not safe. You will be uncomfortable, and you can lose a lot. You can lose all that you worked for fighting against a system, right? Because the colonizer
Yeah.
themselves have ways of scare tactic, and like some may scare, like some people ruin your life, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, you fighting against the system that I'm trying to maintain. Just like when we talk about white supremacy, it's the same
Yep.
thing. You're fighting against the system that I'm trying to maintain and sustain. At the
Yep.
end of the day, you will go down. And because I done stomped on your head, right, and killed you in front of everybody, I bet you none of y'all else, nobody else
No,
going
the
to jump
rest.
up in
Right.
here.
Right.
You're gonna sit down and you're
Right.
gonna take this check,
Right.
and you're
Right.
gonna be happy sending your kids wherever you sending them. Um,
Exactly.
and again, like we always talk about, right, there's power in numbers,
Yeah.
and folks banding together to support one another. But like you said, it's not safe. Folks have to be willing to sacrifice and willing to
Hmm.
lose, and that's a very hard conversation to have when you have people that are just trying to survive.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
but I really really enjoy the parallels that you brought between education and violence, because I don't think that that is talked about enough, because
Right.
it's happening right now. What
Right.
time is it? 12 something right now.
Right.
There's a kid in somebody's classroom being
Yep.
assaulted right now.
Right
Not
now. Yeah.
physically, not verbally by the teacher, not the teacher calling them names, but low expectations is a violent assault on a
It's
child.
violent.
Low academic
Hmm.
expectations and behavior, all of that is an academic or assault on a child, or
Right.
just a teacher simply standing there believing that a kid can't learn. Right? There
Right.
are
Right.
teachers who walked into schools today and was like, I mean, I prepared my lesson, but they're not going to get it
Yep.
anyway.
Yep. Yep.
All of that. But
Or refusing to teach you about you, refusing to expose you to your history, to your culture, to
yeah,
those things that will inspire you and give you the strength and the focus and the clarity to move forward and to fight this fight.
yep, all of that is violence
It's
against
violent.
our children. And again, I'm super psyched that you drew that parallel, because I think that we graze over that, right? Like,
Hmm.
we say all like, oh, it's not good. We got to get better teachers. No, it's violence. And if
It's
we look
violent.
at it as violence and we looked at it as criminal,
Right.
how will we start to keep people accountable for these actions against children?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. And and then also just structurally, right? The education, so the education of Black people have always been of interest to the ruling class, right?
Mhm.
And the ruling class in the United States, because we say things like ruling class and we want to talk about other countries, right? There is absolutely a ruling class in the United States.
It is.
And the education of Black people have always been of interest to the ruling class, because they've always wanted to ensure that Black people could only be educated to the extent that the results of that education serves them.
Benefits them
Right.
without a
And
doubt.
so, and again, so so post enslavement, all of a sudden we don't, we don't have this free labor anymore. But so let's control the education and make sure that they only get education that only prepares them to be servants.
Yep.
Right. It's the
It,
it's an extent that was never interrupted. That was never interrupted.
it wasn't, but it can be. And
It
it
can
can
be.
be
Yes.
through liberatory education and liberatory practices.
Yes.
So when we talk about liberatory education, what does that mean to you? What does that look like for children?
Yeah. So again, right, these words that people have taken the power out of these words. So now all of a sudden liberatory education is like, oh look, they colored a picture of Martin Luther King in school today. Right, right. Oh look, what I'm saying? Oh look, we went to the museum and we saw, and so again, liberation, the fight for liberation means that somebody is oppressing you violently
Yes.
so.
Yes, and I'm not gonna free nobody by coloring a picture of Martin Luther
Right,
King.
right,
That
right,
ain't it.
right.
That ain't it.
Right,
That ain't it.
that ain't it. If someone is interested in your maintaining and being on the lower level in society so that they can step on you.
Yep.
Right. So again, the act of oppressing people is violent. And we are going to have to, we have, I'm not saying that we haven't, right? So we're only sitting here because we have been successful at pushing back, because our ancestors have been successful, have launched campaigns and said, yeah, no more. So we know we have all that history of the slave revolts, right? We have that history of the Black freedom movements. We even have that history of fugitive pedagogy, right? That Dr. Jarvis Givens talks about, that even in these schools, that there have been Black teachers who, right in the very face of the oppressor, have said, no, let me help you. And those pedagogical geniuses have inspired generations of Black of freedom fighters, have inspired the freedom movements, right? And that type of thing. So I'm just bringing that up to say that I don't want to paint this picture like it hasn't been happening, and like you said, that it's not happening. We have lots of warriors out there. We have long traditions of this stuff, right? And we need more, because can you hear? Did I freeze?
Oh yeah, I thought it was me, child. You
Okay,
back.
okay. Okay, because every so we need more, because every generation the oppression and the oppressors become more sophisticated, right? So we don't need fewer. We don't need to retreat. It's not time to retreat. Right? It's time to move forward. Same thing with this BS about CRT, right? And banning so-called critical race theory. White women have always been at the forefront of controlling what Black children learn in our schools.
Listen.
Why? Because they want to maintain that control. They want to maintain that control
in their place as well. And you hit on two like hot button issues for me. For one, when I talk, that conversation about CRT is to me sometimes just silly, right? Only because there's no CRT in schools.
Right. It's like, go find somebody else to play with.
Because or say what you mean, like, oh no, we're not learning about Black people in schools, and we're not learning about the true history of this country. Like, that's really what this fight is about. Oh, you're not about to tell people how my grandfather, my great grandfather done killed and raped people, because that's the legacy I come from. Y'all not about to talk about that, right? Like, that's what this fight is really about. Like, critical race theory was never taught in the K through 12 space. It's not. It wasn't taught in genetic colleges either. It's law. Like, all this banning of CRT is actually like, it's a silly.
Again, it's the continuation of that legacy, right? Because it was white women who were at the forefront of harassing Black children and threatening Black children and assaulting Black children as they tried to enter schools with their children.
Look at the pictures. Right? Look at the pictures. Who you see out here yelling, acting crazy.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, we were met at the hands of white men, right? The violence, the rape, and the killing were done by their barbaric behavior. But the taunting, the pushing forward,
of
the
children,
behavior of babies,
of children.
But it still happens today. And the reason why I'm like have to count, it's a trigger point for me to talk about this, because working in K-12 spaces and to see live and in color the antagonistic behavior that white women would push, specifically on young Black boys. And then me being reprimanded for coming to their rescue when I'm not coming to anybody's rescue, but I'm gonna shut her down.
Exactly.
This behavior isn't appropriate.
Right. Not on my watch. We're not. I mean, because I want to know who these people are who are suspending little Black boys from preschool.
Insane. You gonna suspend babies. They babies. And people will sit up here and say, well, you don't know what they be doing, blah, blah, blah. But the percentage of a child who may be unconsolable or uncontrollable in a school, I bet my next paycheck less than 1 or 2%. It ain't by the thousands, it ain't by the hundreds. And if we don't have active and prepared plans, number one, to be able to protect young babies in those spaces, or work adequately with parents to develop plans for those babies who have issues with emotional regulation, then that's on the fault of the adult.
Right. Or have skilled individuals.
Yes.
Right. Because it may be a social worker that's needed. It may be a behavior therapist that's needed. It may be just somebody's grandmama that's needed. It may be the pastor that's needed, or the Sunday school teacher. Right. And so having skilled professors, as opposed to saying, I don't have the skills to teach this child.
Yes.
I'm going to enact my social power, right, and be violent to somebody else's child. Meanwhile, your child is throwing all types of tantrums and throwing all types of things on the floor.
In schools, in the public.
In schools, in public. We talk about January 6th, right? We're talking about,
Grown
and
people. Grown people throwing tantrums.
exactly. But it's right. But it's not, it's not beyond our understanding. We know exactly why it's happening. And it's folks who want to maintain that power and make sure that they maintain a permanent underclass that they can continue to exploit, that they can continue to be over, that they can continue to not have to share resources with, not have to really compete on a fair level with.
Yes.
It's not some innocent, oh, we don't know why it's happening. We know why it's happening.
Know exactly why it's happening.
And it's simply a continuation, right? And so liberatory education is liberating ourselves from those very violent dynamics.
And speaking of that, I can't leave here without speaking about Sisters in Education Circle, because
yes, which you have to come, Shayna.
hey, Reef, you hear that? Okay.
Right. Naked. She needs time off to come to the Sisters in Education Circle retreat.
But like, girl, no, you didn't put me on blast. No, we're gonna work it out. So I'm going to be able to join and come one year. We're definitely going to be able to get in the mode to do that. But when you talk about these, like, freeing yourself from the violence, because as we're talking, right, it's funny, right, when you experience trauma, all the things that happen to your body, even when you relive it. So when I'm thinking about K-12 experience and violence of kids at the hands of white women, like, I start to get hot, right?
No, it's terrible. It's terrible.
I start to get hot. But spaces like Sisters in Education are liberatory, right? Because you're able to do a number of things, be healed, be loved, be amongst folks who are like-minded, learn so much, and we're all like, sit at the feet of our elders, honey.
Yes.
In the Black tradition, like, live.
Yes.
In person. But can you give us a little bit more insight on your leadership with Sisters in Education?
Sure. Yeah, we are so blessed. Like, the way that these elders, these pioneering Black women in education show up and pour into us, you can't put a price on it. You can't measure it. And so I'll just go back very quickly and say that part of why I started Sisters in Education Circle is because, two things. One, I was drowning. I had reached, I was working at the district level in Philadelphia, and I was also in my Penn program. And so people would look at me at that point in my career and be like, oh, she's reached some type of pinnacle, right? And literally the anti-Blackness and the violence got worse and worse the higher up I went. The misogynoir, the hate of Black women in particular, the anti-Blackness in general, and the white violence got worse and worse towards me as an outspoken educator. And it got worse and worse as far as seeing people on these very high levels making decisions that trickle down that were wholly anti-Black. And so it got worse and worse. Again, the treatment towards me, but then also just the psychology of like, what is happening here? And so part of that violence, part of why that violence was allowed to move forward the way it was, is because these educational leaders, the teachers, the principals, the people over PD, the professors in these teacher leadership and educational leadership programs completely left out Black pedagogical genius. They were not bringing these people in for professional development. These people were not on the syllabi. In every program that I've been in, just about every program that I've been in, it was labeled as an urban ed program. So I'm not even talking about like mainstream programs. So you mean to tell me you're training the next generation of urban teachers, which we know, and Jacqueline Jordan Irvine is not on your syllabus?
You got no Black people on the syllabus.
Amos Wilson is not on your syllabus. Asa Hilliard is not on your syllabus. Teresa Perry is not on your syllabus.
Insane.
insane.
That's insane.
And violent.
Very. I agree.
Right.
Yep.
And so part of, what I knew was going to help me put myself back together was to say, no, like we need to be under the tutelage of our elders. We need, we need, because there's this disconnect that they're trying to make sure that we don't move forward with those radical and liberatory understandings of pedagogy and ways of lead. And I was like, oh, no, 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 not today.
That's right.
And so, I've had the amazing privilege to have been mentored and have Lisa Delpit as a friend and mentor and sister and mama and friend of mine since my first year of teaching.
Dope.
And the way that we connected is that I was in one of those progressive schools that I told you about, and they were just showing their whole little progressive behinds, child. It was so ignorant and so violent and then all the white tears came, and then, oh my gosh, this Black lady is attacking me because I want you to be liberatory, right? It was a whole mess. And I remember going through that, and I just emailed Lisa, and I emailed her and I said, because at that time to get through every day, every night I would go home and I would read the Bible and I would read other people's children interchangeably.
Mm.
And so I reached out to her and I told her that that truth telling in that book has been keeping me through this situation. Right. And again, these are progressive people who would quote Lisa, but still we're doing the opposite of what she was talking about. In her book. Like, you are the actual non-example in this book.
If people don't reflect, they don't see themselves that way.
Well, and they lying. They just liars too. They lying. They dishonest. You're just being dishonest. You're being dishonest.
Well,
You know that
it's
going to, right. You know that it's going to look good to name all these people. Right. But you're really not, you're really. So anyway, and so when I got to that point in my career, I said I wanted to share, because I would not be here without having had Lisa on this journey.
That's dope.
I would not. I mean, there are plenty of days where she was like, listen, I'll come get you. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, where she walked me through my first year of teaching and the anti-Black, like all. And so just, her brilliance in and of itself, that book in and of itself has saved so many of us, right? And have spoke, and to have her walk this journey with me as the authentic lover of Black people and Black children and teacher that she is, there's nothing like it. So with Sisters in Education Circle, I said, I know I can't be the only Black woman in this situation.
Right.
I want to, and this is what has kept me, I want to share this with other Black women. Beautiful. In case that in the event that it will keep them. And I remember I was doing it on my own little dime, and I was like, so I called Lisa, because I thought it was gonna be like me and like, 10 Black women in a hotel room eating hot dogs, and like Lisa, I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this, but I'm gonna do it. And so I called Lisa and I said, Lisa, I really, need you to do this. I need you here and to help us along. What is your fee? Lisa said, Akosua, I'll do it for you for free. And not only did she do it for me for free, she reached out to Gloria Ladson-Billings.
Yes.
She reached out to Joyce King. And then I had another mentor, Dr. Linda Mizell, who was a adjunct professor in my master's in teaching program. She reached out to Rachel Elizabeth Harding. She reached out to Keturah Jenkins Hall. And those women that first year, this is before I got any of my grant funding, came for free.
This is
now we're talking about literally talking like $120,000 budget line
in one room, right? But this just for the speakers alone. You didn't even talk about the place. This is just for the speakers alone you're speaking of.
They came for free and they poured into us. And I made sure that it's an environment that inspires Black woman genius. So we danced, we played hopscotch, we played double dutch, and again, Gloria Ladson-Billings is another person who just her scholarship alone changed my life.
Shout out.
It never dawned on me that I would ever meet her in person or be able to be eldered by her, anything like that. But just to tell you the type of environment that we created, the first thing that Gloria Lesson Billings ever said to me, I was out and we had a little play area going. They were playing double dutch. Now I can't double dutch. Don't take my black girl card. I can't double dutch. And so I walked up and I was talking trash, and Mama Gloria, which is what I call her now, she was on her phone and she turned around very casually and she said, "Get your squad and get your slip." That was the first thing that the Dr. Gloria Lesesne Billings ever said. But that's sisterhood. That's, you know what I mean? To be able to create that environment where we can let our hair down, where we can experience that natural genius that we talked about, that we have in our name, and then get down to the nitty gritty, right? Yes. Of being eldered and being exposed to, you know, from their mouths in this intimate environment.
The reason why it's so beautiful, though, when I think about you, like how you describe it, because though you called on these women to inspire other women, I bet you that they would say they needed that space for themselves as well.
I hope so.
Because of the violence that they have to experience on a daily because of the work that they are doing, right? You done named these are the soldiers, honey. These are
the soldiers.
Out there. At the day, again, paving the way, preserving the tradition, especially when you talk about the notorious GLD. Shout out to GLD.
Listen. Yes. Let me tell you, Mama Gloria, she was like, "Get your squad and get your slip."
Let's get it.
Ma'am, I'm the host. You talking?
Listen.
But let me tell you, one of the second most significant conversations I had with Mama Gloria, the notorious GLB, is towards the end of the session. I just became overwhelmed with emotion, right? Positive. I'm overwhelmed with like, oh, you know, Black women have so much to do, but also overwhelmed with gratitude for what was happening. And they were playing with, it was, you know, we always had music playing and everything. And so I walked into the last session and they were playing Worth Fighting For by Brian Courtney Wilson. You know, you're like you have so much more that's worth fighting for. And I just became overwhelmed with emotion. So I walked into the auditorium and I looked across the auditorium and I could see her sitting, talking to someone across the auditorium. And then I kind of like, you know, fell over with emotion. I had my hand in my lap and I was crying. And the next time I saw Mama Gloria, she had her hand on my shoulder and she was praying heaven down over me.
Listen, elders in the room, child.
Listen, this is the type of stuff that we miss.
Yes.
When we allow them to interrupt our legacy and separate us. Because we're not at a loss for more theory. We're not at a loss for more examples. We don't need any more words necessarily. I mean, I'm grateful for the people who do have words, right? We're at a loss for relationship and making sure that we are in lockstep with the women and men who are setting our legacy of that Black pedagogical genius. So that's what I'll share with you. Yes, about us. There's more, you know,
that's a major point to say when you talk about the interruption of our legacy, the interruption of our connection. It's a huge point right there, Dr. Lesesne. That's huge to point out. And anybody on this platform, if you get a chance to visit or to go to Sisters in Education Circle, like I encourage you to do so, because I just think the power of healing that we as women and women educators need to be in community and connected to each other. I want to give you the opportunity right now in this space to thank a Black teacher. We always give our guests the opportunity to do so before parting ways. So please, you have the floor. Go ahead and thank a Black teacher or some Black teachers.
Yes. So I've only had, I keep counting and forgetting. I think I've only had like 3 Black teachers from K all the way through graduate school. But there are Black teachers that I looked up to when I became a teacher. And so I'm just going to try to, I know we're short for time here, but I just want to try to name as many as possible. So teachers, Mrs. Jordan was one of my only classroom Black teachers at Tropical Elementary School in the early 80s here in Broward County. But then also uh, Mr. Robinson, Sylvester Nooney Robinson. He was a coach and assistant principal my first year of teaching. He had been a teacher, and I was able to look to him. He retired after my first year of teaching, but I had that 1 year to just watch this Black pedagogical genius in action. Same with Mrs. Betty Miller, who was a retired English teacher here in Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, Florida. And I could go on, right? So we have historical Black teachers. I'll just name two more, both of whom have buildings in Broward County, which is my hometown, named after them. The school board building in Broward County is named after Kathleen C. Wright. That is a Black woman and a pioneering educator. And then Mrs. Blanche Ely High School is named after her, another pioneering Black woman. So again, I could go on and on. I didn't have a lot of Black teachers in the classroom, but I certainly, as a young teacher, saw Black teachers either in my day-to-day or read about them or lived in their legacy in Broward County, which was my first teaching job. So thank you. Lots and lots of them.
Yes, shout out to you for thanking the Black teacher. So we are definitely winding down right now on time.
Great.
So what I always also like to give my guests the opportunity to do is have the last word. We're about to roll out, but what would you like to say to the people who have joined us in the conversation today?
Oh, well, welcome. I'm so glad that y'all are here. I've been seeing the comments, and I always love the interaction. And I guess I'll just end with saying, Black people are pedagogical geniuses. We are. Stand in that. Stand in that. Preserve it. Build on it. And for people who don't believe us or are always consistently doubting us, I'm gonna just tell y'all, like my grandma would tell me, I can show you better than I can tell you.
Yes.
Don't believe us, just watch. So
Don't believe me, just watch.
Don't believe me, just watch. So
yes.
Live into your pedagogical genius, stand on it. Love y'all to life. For all the fellow education warriors out there, keep shining. We see you and we need you.
Shout out, keep fighting for liberation. So of course, I want to thank everybody for joining us for this rendition of Building the Black Educator Pipeline. And shout out to all our beautiful women for Women's History Month. And we thank you, Dr. Lesesne, for joining us. But we will be back here next week, same time, same place, everybody. Peace.